Imagine you've got a peaceful farm, a beautiful cornfield, and a quiet neighborhood, until one entitled neighbor decides to treat your property like her own personal shortcut. It sounds unbelievable, but that's exactly what happened when this HOA Karen started cutting through my cornfield like it was a public path. Now, if you've ever had someone blatantly disrespect your space, you know how frustrating it can be. For weeks I tried to let it slide, but as the days went on, it got worse. She'd trample through the corn, ignoring the damage, acting like she had the right to walk through any time she pleased. Something had to give. So I decided to take matters into my own hands. What did I do, you ask? I put up a little surprise under the ground, spikes to discourage her from using my field as her shortcut. It wasn't long before she stepped on them, and when she did, let's just say her reaction was something you have to see to believe. You won't believe the chaos that followed, and trust me, it didn't end well for her. So what happens next? Stick around, because this HOA Karen's meltdown is just getting started. At first, it seemed like a minor issue. I noticed her walking across the field now and then, but I thought maybe it was just a one-time thing. Maybe she was lost or in a hurry. But when it became a daily occurrence, I started getting annoyed. It wasn't just the fact that she was cutting through my land, it was the attitude. She'd stroll through, like she owned the place, not even acknowledging the damage she was causing. The corn I worked hard to grow was getting trampled, and I wasn't having it anymore. At first, I left polite notes asking her to stop. Nothing worked. She'd ignore them, as if they were beneath her. Then, I tried talking to her face to face. I was calm, asking her kindly to take a different route, but she scoffed, saying it was her right to walk wherever she pleased. Her sense of entitlement was off the charts. I realized I wasn't dealing with someone who would listen to reason. That's when I started thinking about a more creative solution. I researched ways to discourage trespassing, and that's when I came across the idea of using spikes, something simple yet effective. The plan seemed harmless enough, right? But little did I know, it was about to set off a chain of events that would escalate far beyond anything I'd imagined. The day I finally set the spikes, I thought I'd solved the problem. I made sure they were placed carefully under the soil, just out of sight but sharp enough to be a deterrent. I wasn't trying to cause harm, just make it uncomfortable enough for her to find another way. It felt like a small victory after weeks of frustration, but I had no idea what kind of storm I was about to unleash. The next morning, I heard shouting outside. At first, I thought it was someone else, maybe a neighbor arguing over something trivial, but then I heard her voice. Karen was out there, yelling at the top of her lungs. I ran outside to see what was going on. There she was, standing in the middle of my cornfield, clutching her foot, blood seeping through her sock. She was in agony, but the way she was shouting, blaming me for setting traps and trying to hurt her, I realized she wasn't thinking clearly. People started to gather around, drawn by the commotion. I was trying to explain what had happened, that I never intended to hurt her, but she wasn't listening. Her eyes were wide with rage, and she kept insisting that I deliberately set those spikes to harm her. Her version of the story was quickly spreading, and I could already see the neighborhood turning against me. Suddenly, the situation wasn't just about a neighbor walking through my land. It had become a public spectacle, and I was the villain in her version. That's when I realized things were about to get much worse. She wasn't going to let this go, and she had the HOA on her side. As the days went on, the tension in the neighborhood grew. The HOA got involved, and suddenly, it wasn't just Karen and I. It felt like I was up against the entire community. Karen had the perfect way of spinning the story, talking about how dangerous my farm had become, painting me as a malicious property owner with no respect for her or anyone else. Her dramatic tales about the spikes made it sound like I was some kind of monster, and unfortunately, some of the neighbors believed her. I could feel the eyes on me every time I stepped out of my house. People would whisper, and when I tried to talk to anyone, I'd get cold stares or hurried exits. It felt like no one had my back, and honestly, I was starting to doubt myself. Had I gone too far? Was there another way I could have handled things? But then I'd remember how she'd treated my property, and the doubt would fade. The HOA sent a notice, threatening me with a fine if I didn't remove the spikes and make amends with Karen. They even said I could face legal action if she pressed charges. It felt like the walls were closing in. I wasn't sure what was more infuriating, the fact that they were siding with her, or that they were ignoring the real issue. She had been walking across my field without permission for months. But it wasn't just about the fine or the legal trouble. It was about the principle. I didn't want to back down. The anger started to build inside me again, like a pressure cooker. Something had to give, and I knew this wasn't over. But with Karen constantly stirring the pot, I couldn't shake the feeling that things were going to escalate even further, faster than I could handle. Just when I thought things couldn't get worse, the next bombshell dropped. One evening, as I was working late in the barn, I heard someone knocking at my door. I opened it to find a sheriff's deputy standing there, holding an envelope. My heart sank as he handed it to me. It was a legal notice from Karen's lawyer, demanding compensation for pain and suffering due to the injury she'd supposedly sustained from the spikes. The letter claimed she had incurred medical bills and would be seeking damages for emotional distress. I stood there, staring at the paper in disbelief. This was getting out of hand. Not only was I facing a potential fine from the HOA, but now I was being threatened with a lawsuit. I had never expected things to escalate like this. Karen wasn't just fighting to get her way anymore. She was actively trying to destroy me. I could feel the heat rising in my chest as I read the letter. Karen's lawyer had even included a witness statement from one of my neighbors, someone who had apparently seen her limping after the incident and had heard her talking about how she was going to take me down. The worst part, the witness wasn't even someone I knew well, but the HOA seemed to have taken their word as gospel. It felt like everything was turning against me, and now the fight wasn't just about my cornfield, it was about my entire future. As if that wasn't enough, I got a call from my cousin later that night. She told me she'd heard from a few people in the neighborhood that Karen had been making threats, talking about how she had connections with the HOA president and might be able to get me officially evicted from my property. That was the last straw. The stakes were higher than I ever could have imagined. Karen wasn't just after compensation anymore. She wanted to take everything from me. The tension had reached its breaking point. I knew I had to act before Karen and her lawyer made the next move, but I wasn't about to roll over. I gathered all the evidence I had, photos of the damage she caused to my field, the letters I'd sent her, even recordings of our conversations where she refused to respect my property. I wasn't just going to let her destroy my life over a cornfield. The day of the HOA meeting arrived, and it felt like all eyes were on me. I stood in front of the board, my hands shaking, but I was determined to stand my ground. Karen was there too, smug as ever, sitting with her lawyer, ready to make her case. The room was tense as she presented her version of events, dramatically describing how I deliberately set a trap to hurt her. The crowd murmured in agreement. It felt like she had them all in her pocket. But then I stood up. I didn't hold back. I laid out the truth, how she had trespassed, ignored my requests, and how I'd only taken action out of frustration after being pushed too far. I showed the evidence, everything I had, and for the first time, the room went silent. Just as the meeting was about to end, I saw Karen's smug smile falter. The HOA president, who had been quietly listening the whole time, stood up. "I've heard enough," he said, his voice cutting through the tension. Then, in a move none of us saw coming, he turned to Karen. "I've looked into this. You've been causing problems in this neighborhood for years. Multiple complaints have been filed against you for similar incidents. Your credibility is questionable at best." Everyone in the room was stunned. Karen's face went pale, and she sputtered, but it was too late. The board members began to whisper amongst themselves. The truth was finally out. It wasn't just me she'd been bullying, she had a history of causing trouble wherever she went. But the final twist came when the HOA president turned back to me. "We're dropping all charges and fines against you, and as for Miss Karen..." He paused for dramatic effect, his eyes narrowing. We'll be conducting a full investigation into her actions. She may be facing consequences of her own. I could barely process what had just happened. After months of tension, of being made out to be the villain, everything had flipped in an instant.